best, the plantation economy, the issue of the Maroons. What is the philosophy behind the Maroons? Well, it's about the people looking at themselves in the mirror and seeing capacity, and looking at their space and seeing that possibilities, and putting the capacity and the possibilities together. It means that there's a lot that we could be doing for ourselves. So when we talk about the regional economy and now we're facing the challenge of producing more food for ourselves, this is what is there in the whole philosophy behind it, that comes out of correcting the problems of the plantation economy, where you recognize that these economies were set up to satisfy the needs of the metropole. You want to change that, and to change it, it takes time, but it also it requires a certain understanding of where we have come from and where we need to go. And where we need to go is to ensure that large numbers of people could see possibilities, see their own capacity, see it in the mirror, and see their space as offering possibilities, that they can do something to satisfy our own requirements, but also to look across the world and see that there are things that we can get into where we can earn foreign exchange. Because unfortunately, and this is what comes out of Dimas's work, you're small, and I have tried to capture it in terms of my own, characterizing that our development problem is, the economics of rocks. Because if you're on a rock and you have people on the rock, really the only serious resource you have is what is in the heads of your people. The economics of rocks. So, so it's a case of seeing that even on a rock, there are possibilities, but you have to think of the education, the training, the capacity of the people. But that training and education has to include a capacity to understand what is of value in your space and what is happening in that world out there that allows you a possibility to earn a living by exporting. So we should have a whole lot of people ready here to identifying what can happen in our space that can earn for us incomes by exporting abroad. Whether the world is moving in the direction of this notion of a global and free and open market, or whether it's now moving into one of reshoring and friend-shoring and the pullback from globalization. We will always have to export, because there is no way, as Dimas and others have shown, that we can produce the things that we need just to run our economy and run our societies. There's no way we can produce all that we need to have to run these societies. And more so since our taste patterns and so much of our infrastructure resembles the infrastructure in terms of transport and all of that. Our transport problem, it's because we have gravitated to this notion that mobility is not only about your social mobility, but not only your economic mobility, but also your mobility in terms of transport, and what kind of car you drive, so that your sense of well-being is determined by the quality of your transport. And we can clog all our roads and have a system that is absolutely inappropriate as a transport system for our countries of such small size. And we keep, expanding roads, etc., and so on, and expanding highways, and what happens is that the next time around we just fill them up with traffic, you know. So, as I said, we have gone wrong in, and I use Trinidad and Tobago as an example, because there is no clear ideological or philosophical base any longer that treats with the issue of the inherent inequality that exists and attempts to deal with it, and helps us to recognize that there does exist some element, there do exist resources amongst us, including resources that we have to create by way of education and training, and an education and training that is fit for purpose insofar as people can recognize, one, that I have a responsibility for myself and my space, and can earn something within the space, to some extent producing for the domestic economy in terms of food and so on, but also producing to earn money abroad. You know, I always refer to an example that I saw, I experienced in Dominica some years ago. I went to a Carib community. I was doing work looking at poverty in Dominica. And myself and my colleague, Dennis Brown, a sociologist, we said, well, we must buy some article from this community, because they have, you know, artifacts, they have goods, you know, things that seem to have been produced in this Carib village, in order to show and remind ourselves that we visited the village and we left some income to whoever were the people who were producing what we thought were the handicraft for sale to tourists in the village. So we picked up items and we started looking. Now Dominica has a population of, I think, just about 80,000. And here's a Carib village that is supposed to be, you know, not at the center of the development areas in Dominica. But, you know, people go there, it's a Carib village. People, tourists may wander and get there. And when we turned over the article that says, you know, as a memento from Dominica, turn it over, made in China. China, 1.4 billion people, and in that 1.4 billion people, there's somebody who had the idea of producing an artifact that they could put on top of it things that would remind somebody that they went to Dominica. So there's something as a memento from Dominica, but it's really made in China. And they can sell it to be sold in a Carib village, a remote Carib village in Dominica with a population of 80,000. Clearly somebody worked out that there's a market for their craft goods. Once they can put, you know, get things that look like Dominica and put on the top of it, but they establish its origin, made in China, product of China. Don't we not ourselves need to have that kind of capacity where we, and that kind of orientation where we are looking at what's happening everywhere in the world, or as many places in the world, to see where we can get a market for things that we can produce in our space? I think so. It's possible. And if you're talking about the creative sector, to some extent, the creative sector, some of the people are doing that. They're finding ways of producing things, getting into film, getting into music, and being able to win income abroad. Well, many more of us have to be engaged in that kind of exercise. And this takes me immediately to some of the work of Eric Sensi, when he talks about having looked at all that the technology school with Trevor Farrell and Govan and others, where they had come up and said, well, you know, we have to ride the technological wave. So we have to be monitoring what's happening in technology, what's happening. And I absolutely agree with it, that you have to have, I say that we have to have a system of Macoin across the board. We must know, we have to know what's happening in at the frontiers of technology, what's happening in trade, what's happening in business, what's happening in finance. We have to have our people engaged across the board and understanding, listening to the news, reading, seeing what's going on elsewhere. Because what goes on elsewhere offers the possibility for our exports, and which I said, inevitably we have to be able to export and win markets elsewhere. Wherever those markets are, we have to create them. Now, riding the technological wave, which is the idea promoted by Farrell and others, is technically not much different to what you read in Lewis's big book, Theory of Economic Growth, where he talks about knowledge. And it's about education, training, but also this sort of orientation, understanding what's happening at the cutting edge. And if you have your people constantly looking at what's happening at the cutting edge, there might be occasions when, through reverse engineering, through just looking on, you recognize that there's a problem that they might not have solved, and you become the cutting edge yourself, able to produce a product that can win markets as they emerge, using new and as well existing technology. Using existing technology, you might be able to modify the technology in a way that others might not have thought of. So it is, constant monitoring. And, we're very good at monitoring our neighbor's business. We know at what time they came home. If they came home at 4 o'clock in the morning with somebody, yes, you will have seen it. And so you collect the information. But you also do something else. You disseminate the information. So at 6 o'clock, you call the other neighbor and tell the other neighbor, well, this is what happened across there. If we develop that kind of orientation to trade, to technology, we would have a people who are knowledgeable and possibly make more creative, because they're looking at what others are creating and seeing where they can add to it, where they can use it in creating goods and services that might, be really and cutting edge themselves. So it's all of this I've attempted to, recommend in my own work as a practitioner, working as a consultant, and surely in teaching I try to help students to recognize. Somebody told me the other day, yes, one past student told me that my reading list was almost like a book. Yes, I insisted that you read as much as possible, be constantly aware of what's happening, but also read the work of other people, so that when you leave, and I saw my job as an academic as being responsible, as being competitive myself, so that whatever the people always mention Singapore, and it's a good country with which to compare ourselves. Whenever, I stood before a class, I saw myself as ensuring that I am as competitive as my opposite number in the National University of Singapore, which started gained its independence around the same time as we did in the Caribbean, but has today a per capita income 4 or 5 times that of most of our Caribbean countries, including Trinidad and Tobago, which has had oil and gas, etc. And I attribute that partly to the human resource development program of the government of Singapore. And when you compare, and which I did some years ago, look at one of the standard tests that they use, which we also use, performance at secondary level. They started to universalize secondary education, attempted at universalization of secondary education just as we in the 1970s and 1980s. And when I checked then, some time ago in the 1980s, they were doing London and Cambridge school certificate, whatever, which we had dispensed with and got to our CXC. But when we were doing both, when we were all doing the same tests, Singapore was looking at science and technology in particular, because of that in the late 1970s, 1980s, we were at the Department of Economics looking at technology and technological change, and there's that most important volume that I invite all students of economics to read, the special issue of social and economic studies, that the technology policy studies, which were done by people at St. Augustine and Mona, Urban, C.Y. Thomas, as well as Trevor Farrell and others here on the campus. Technology policy studies. So that as an offshoot of that work, I looked at how we were performing at secondary level compared to the Asian countries, and in particular Singapore. And the base of science and technology would be the physics, the chemistry, the biology, the mathematics, etc. All right. When you looked at the results in Singapore over a number of years at that time, when they did badly, they got 70-something% passes in physics or 70-something% passes in A-level subjects. When we did well in the Caribbean, it was Barbados, and they got close to 70%. So Singapore was doing badly when their results came down to 70% or so. That means when they were doing normally, they were up 80-90%. And in Jamaica and Trinidad, we seldom got above 50%, etc. The other thing about it is that they continue to expand their secondary school system. And if you go and check today, you see that they get results that are 80% pass rates and above, both at the school certificate and the higher school certificate, which is the A-level. That is the kind of base you need for science and technology today. We are still much lower, and yes, we have universalized, but we have used this notion of our having universalized secondary education to make the argument, well, we can't get such good results because we have everybody in secondary school system. No, they have this notion that if you go to secondary school, because we have universalized, we have created an excuse for mediocrity. Because we are saying, well, if everybody is going to secondary school, well, only a certain percentage, so if we don't get if we don't get 50 or so percent, well, it's all right because they can't all. They come with a different notion that the vast majority can complete a secondary school system and do well enough to get 5 or more passes. A different orientation. Because they assume what we today regard as what we know to be the bell-shaped curve, that there are only about 3 or 4% of your population who will be Einstein-like in capacity. And there's likewise at the other end of the tail, only about 3 or 4% who have a sort of learning disability. And even with people with learning disability, they're now seeing, well, yeah, there's some things, they're differently able, but there are some things where they can learn. So I know of cases in Canada where people who might have been deemed to have Down syndrome have been to university with Down syndrome, complete the course, all right? So it's a different orientation that they have in Singapore and these places. And this explains why, if you go and check the data, you'll see that 70-80% of the population of the age group 20 to 24 would go on to tertiary in Singapore, South Korea, etc. And that, in the case of South Korea, explains why, to some extent, you can have Samsung products that today, I suspect, Samsung phones are today superior to any phones that the Japanese make. I don't know of any. And I used to hear about Nokia, but I don't know if Nokia, I used to hear BlackBerry, but I don't know if BlackBerry is still around. But you know of Samsung. And the iPhone and Apple can't look across at Samsung and look down. They have to look across. And Toyota can't look across at Kia and Hyundai and look down because they're getting there, all right? So it's the capacity of your people to make products that can compete in the international environment, whether it's deglobalizing or globalizing. That is a measure of the problem. And our general population has to understand that, as well as do well in school. And we have to have systems that promote that kind of excellence that most of us can go through, just as most of us can go to primary school and learn to read and write. Likewise, most of us can be literate in the science and technological culture of the 21st century. If people use cell phones, everybody uses a cell phone. Why should you not know what is behind the cell phone? All right? Everybody uses, vehicles. Why should you not know what makes these vehicles work in the way they work? Everybody now has a laptop. Why should you not know how the laptop works and the science behind it? What is wrong with our learning that? Because all that is part of the culture of consumption, and we must know, because we want other people to buy products that we produce in the 21st century. And the sooner we get that kind of capacity, that sense that is widespread across our region, we're not going to make it.